we run jihadists. The CIA does, and so does Mossad.
So recently, Jeffrey Sachs was on Andrew Napolitano's podcast talking a little bit about how CIA and Mossad are both machines of mass murder. What they're doing in Gaza, what they're doing in terms of geopolitics, drumming up war propaganda, and why the U.S.-Israeli relationship isn't to the benefit of regular Americans, even those preaching America first that support Israel. So let's watch this and let's react. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
First of all, 25 hostages, and they're killing 50 to 100 innocent Palestinians every day. They're killing 50 to 100 innocent Palestinians every day by luring them to food sites and then shooting them deliberately. And we know this from testimony of IDF soldiers in recent days, carried in stories in Israeli media. They're mass murdering the Palestinians before our eyes. And this man talks about the moral and ethical responsibility. This man is a mass murderer. That's Mossad's job. Now, Mossad and the CIA have a very strong relationship. They are closely allied in many operations around the world, especially in the Middle East, but in other regions as well. And that is a very key part of American foreign policy and a very key part of the U.S.-Israel relationship. The Mossad-CIA connection goes back at least more than 60 years, we know. It's very strong, and I always emphasize it is the CIA where you find our foreign policy, not the White House especially. The CIA is the deep state. It keeps the long-term strategy, whether it's to try to weaken or overthrow governments in Russia or Iran or other places. It was the lead agency in a long war against the Syrian government that took hundreds of thousands of lives and culminated in a jihadist regime coming to power, which suddenly we declared to be our wonderful friend and ally.
Yeah, Sachs is right about this. As far as Gazans and Palestinians lining up in front of aid sites and getting shot, this is a tried and true phenomenon that's taken place over the last weeks especially. It's not a conspiracy theory. You can even see this reported by sites like PBS and Yahoo and very, mainstream U.S. political coverage networks, where even today 22 Palestinians were shot at an aid site by IDF soldiers. IDF soldiers, we know, were given orders to do this, is that once the Palestinians line up at certain sites, you can kill them, preferably where there's not cameras pointing around. And by the way, cameras have caught some of these killings, and most projections are that there's something like 6,000 to 1,000 deaths at these aid sites alone. This is treacherous barbarism, but it's not unlike what we're used to from Gaza, from the Israelis. They've taken out city centers and metropolises like Rafah, and we're seeing this spill over into policy that, makes the U.S. complicit because the U.S. is bankrolling it. Sachs is also right about Syria. The U.S. dumped in at least $15 billion into Operation Timber Sycamore, where the CIA led a regime change operation hoping to ally with Al-Qaeda against Assad's regime. They finally got that last year. The Turks got involved and helped overthrow him, and Assad's now in Russia, kind of living in exile. But the U.S. supported Al-Qaeda in Syria. Now fundamentalists rule it, a guy named Jolani, sometimes called al-Shara. And Trump said, yeah, he has a strong past. You know what he has a strong past doing? Shooting at soldiers as a member of Al-Qaeda in Iraq. And then he later went to Syria to do the same thing. So that's where we're at, and Sachs is right. The CIA and Mossad are behind all of these orchestrated regime change policies where they formulate the foreign policy. It's not the American voters through elections, that's for sure.
Because, in fact, we run jihadists. The CIA does, and so does Mossad, contrary to what casual thought would suggest.
Yeah.
So I'm not surprised by it, other than how clearly stated all of this is. That is just a long, professional, deadly, horrible relationship. Horrible because it has made a 4,000 kilometer swath of violence across North Africa, the Horn of Africa, the Eastern Mediterranean, and West Asia, running from Libya to Iran. This is murder incorporated, and murder, whether it's of the leaders for overthrows of government or mass murders of Palestinians, does not solve anything other than making mayhem and murder.
Yeah, I hate to agree, and the CIA at least has been that way, especially since the start of it. Even in the 50s, just after it had transitioned from the OSS to the CIA, it began to launch regime change operations for the first time. So regime change became the top priority of U.S. foreign policy at that point. We had regime change operations that succeeded both in Iran in 1953 and Guatemala in 1954. And Dulles tried to overthrow Rafael Trujillo in the Dominican Republic. That failed. He ultimately was assassinated, though. And that information came out because of the recent JFK files release. And then he orchestrated the catastrophic Bay of Pigs, which was supposed to be the false flag to set up the overthrow of the Castro regime. Thankfully, that was stopped because JFK had good sense of it. But I'm just talking about the CIA here. Mossad's history is also dark and, complicit with regime change operations and endless wars and drawing the United States into these wars via propaganda in the Middle East. That's what happened with Iraq. Netanyahu clamored for that. He testified in favor of that in Congress. He also wanted Gaddafi overthrown and Assad thrown. He also wants Khomeini overthrown. What do you know? And we just got almost bogged down in that. So Sachs is totally right.
If Netanyahu knows that Trump is either lying or has been grossly misled when he said it's totally obliterated, what do you expect he'll ask Trump to do next?
Well, there will be more war if Netanyahu has his choice. And what was apparent from even the involvement that the United States had is that Trump's own base is against this, as are most of the American people. Frankly, I think most Americans are sick of Israel's wars and Israel's murders and Israel's boasting about assassinations. They're sick of it. Not everyone, but most. And that is true in Trump's base as well. So Netanyahu will continue to do what he's done for 30 years. He will continue to provoke. He will continue to make whatever claims and incentives he can to draw the United States into more war. And Trump got a tiny taste of what the real politics are. Trump could not motivate even his own strong supporters into supporting what the U.S. was doing. And that's why he had to go overboard to say what a wonderful, glorious, definitive success it is, because his base was against the whole thing. If he said, yeah, and it didn't work on top of that, it makes the whole thing absolutely absurd.
Yeah, I think he's right about this. And, much of Trump's base did not support this. A lot of it did, though, and was making excuses along the way, helping Trump to move the goalpost from, I'm not going to launch a new war, to they can't have a nuclear weapon, to Israel's doing this on their own and we're not going to bomb them, to we actually are going to bomb them, to what about regime change? Why not have a regime change? So every step along the way, there were some pro-Trump zealots that supported that, but a lot of his supporters didn't. And you could see that from polls posted by people like Charlie Kirk, who threw out polls, and it was something like 75% of his audience opposed this. And at the same time, you saw all the 2016 Republican Never Trump neocons come out of the woodwork and say, hey, we're with Trump, and if you don't support this regime change, you're not with MAGA, you're not with Trump. So they were trying to steer him in that direction, too. These propagandists have not learned a thing since they started this war propaganda about, bellicose militarism in the Middle East years and years ago. They were supposed to be ousted from power, but they still seem to have a place in this administration. So I think Sachs is right. This is a tragic situation to get embroiled in. It's one of the biggest follies of U.S. government. He's right. Most Americans are probably sick of it. A lot of Americans don't pay particular attention to foreign policy, though I argue they should, because it impacts almost every realm of their life, from their civil liberties to the amount of money that they pay for goods and services to the debt that's contracted and then foisted upon their posterity. So yeah, I think Sachs is right here.
What are the is it realistic to fear that Trump will use nuclear weapons next time around?
I don't think so. I really doubt that. I think that, as I say, the United States has no security risk in the world other than a nuclear war. And I think that this is really understood by a lot of people who still make wars, who still say, oh, we're threatened by this, we're threatened by that, we're threatened by global terrorism. Remember the war on global terror and how Americans were terrorized by all of this, which was never a threat in the way that it was described. I don't believe that we're anywhere close to having a nuclear war over this. But if you push other nuclear powers like Russia or North Korea or Pakistan, you could certainly provoke a nuclear war. That is absolutely, or China, obviously, I should mention, over Taiwan, another phony issue that would never be the issue it is were it not for the provocative American positions on this.
Yeah, I totally agree with him. There's no reason to think that Trump is trigger hungry and trigger happy for a nuclear war, even if it comes to new bellicosity and new antagonism toward Iran at the behest of Israel or the neocons. We get involved in another kerfuffle like that. It doesn't make sense to do a preemptive nuclear strike against Iran, especially because that would mean likely a reprisal from Russia or China, potentially. Not guaranteed. They might not want to sacrifice their regimes over Iran, but those are both BRICS allies of Iran. And it's a catastrophic situation in which the U.S. continues to rattle sabers with all these powers, some of which have nukes, some of them which don't. And all that said, I do think nuclear war is closer with Russia than a lot of people want to admit. And we see that because of the prolonged antagonism in this war, the prolonged support for the war. I'm thankful that, U.S. hot troops on the ground aren't involved in it, because I think that has the chance to escalate into nuclear war more than any other thing. U.S. troops on the ground or EU troops on the ground, that would exacerbate the potential of that drastically. But we know that the doomsday clock is right now like 83 seconds to midnight. That's about as close. I think it is as close as we've ever gotten to nuclear war by the people that analyze these things. And it's closer than even during the Cuban Missile Crisis, from what I understand. So that's where we're at. I agree with Sachs. There's no reason to think Trump will use nukes preemptively, though.
Because if it weren't for America arming Taiwan, Taiwanese politicians would never do the provocative things that they are actually doing, many of them, which bring us closer to a direct confrontation between the U.S. and China. In other words, I don't believe that this is leading to America's first use of a nuclear weapon, but I do believe it is leading us to the real possibility of a nuclear war that completely becomes a global annihilation.
Yeah, totally agree with them on China, especially the right likes to popularize propaganda about China, much like the left. The mainstream liberals want to provoke tensions with Russia, and the propaganda involved in that we should go to war, a proxy war with China over Taiwan. They got that meme that says, I'm not dying for Israel. Well, I want to have a meme that says, I'm not dying for Taiwan as well, because that's not what the right wants to bring up as much, even though militarization in the Pacific has massively expanded the last few years. It's not really caught by a lot of people. It is reported on by great journalists like Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. He spent a lot of focus on that. And it is true, but we shouldn't make a new proxy war with yet another nuclear power, even a greater one, over Taiwan. And a lot of right-wingers especially want to do that right now.
That, I think, is the real point I'm trying to make, which is that our foreign policy is so erratic, so irresponsible, so devoid of true international principles, so filled with a lot of BS that that's what makes it very dangerous for us.
Yeah, have to agree.
Would Netanyahu is he crazy enough to use nuclear weapons against Iran?
Under certain circumstances, yes. If the state of Israel was threatened by a massive attack by Iran that followed an attack by Israel, then yes, that's absolutely possible. And that's one of the things that could trigger a global nuclear war.
That's why the Iranian regime has been very consistent in supporting a nuclear weapon-free Middle East. Of course, the US and Israel don't want that because, what do you know? Israel has a secret nuclear weapons program, the same premise they used to preemptively launch strikes against Iran 2 weeks ago. So that's where we're at. Iran supports disarming the entire region. The US and Israel won't allow that, but that would prevent a nuclear war likely from breaking out in the Middle East. Sachs says it's on the table under certain circumstances. It's hard to disagree that a nuclear war wouldn't be on the table for any nuclear power with nuclear weapons under any circumstances, but I sure hope not, and I want to do everything I can to avert that in the interests of peace, commerce, and honest friendship, the same values that Thomas Jefferson talked about in his first inaugural address.
And Netanyahu absolutely would. That's why Israel has them. And Israel thinks it can provoke any side. It has pretended that its Iron Dome and other air defense systems give an absolute protection to Israel. Now we see that this is completely false. And so if Israel provokes another attack, and there's a massive attack from Iran that is threatening the heart of Israel, and one can imagine many ways that could happen, then I have no doubt that Israel would contemplate the use of one or more of its nuclear weapons. So any state threatened with survival that has nuclear weapons would do so.
Yeah, I have to agree. You know, it's a dreadful prospect I hope never pans out, but I think his logic is really the same as I just explained.
And this is definitely true of Israel, given this mentality that is there, which is stoking up dangers because it refuses to have any kind of real diplomacy with the Arab world over the core issue that has been the core issue for 100 years, and that is the right of Palestinians that also live in the same area as Israel and that Israel is occupying. And because of that, the violence continues to soar. Israel provokes. It is not in a strong position the way that it thinks it is, and last week exposed its vulnerabilities. It counts on the United States to rescue it, but we can see that the United States may say, no, don't do that. The Israel provokes, believing that the U.S. will follow. The U.S. doesn't follow. Mass response from the Iranian side, and then Israel's feels that its survival is a threat, and it uses a nuclear weapon, after which there could be many scenarios of Pakistan defending Iran, or North Korea, or many other things that one could imagine.
Yeah, I don't want to see any of those scenarios play out in real time, that's for sure. That would be the potential beginning of a multi-regional nuclear war. I don't want to see that happen, but as long as the U.S. is supporting Israel, throwing $20 billion a year at it since October 7th, I think we're on track to do $20 billion again. Before that, it was $4 billion a year, brought up to that point by Obama as a result of making Netanyahu mad over the JCPOA. So, you can't have that. Netanyahu can't be mad at you, so we got to throw him a bone in the form of more money anyways. And then we got the worst of both worlds. The JCPOA was shredded, and we upped the ante and send Israel more money. And now we send 5 times that since October 7th. And there's no signs that that will come back anytime soon, especially with the stranglehold that AIPAC has. But thankfully, patriots like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Thomas Massie, at least on this issue, are blowing the cover off AIPAC right now and getting huge interviews on Tucker Carlson and Theo Von and other outlets that will actually talk about this and why it's such a problem. It's how Tucker exposed Ted Cruz in front of a mass audience as well. So that is the glimmer of hope in all this. Hopefully, mentality of Americans does change toward this to some extent, and we'll see that play out.
That could then lead on to a nuclear war that would rapidly get out of hand and destroy the world. That's why every single thing that we're doing in all of this is so unbelievably dangerous and reckless. It's hard to put into words without profanity.
Yeah.
Sorry to say. And
true.
While the president uses profanity, we're not going to use profanity the same way. And the fact of the matter is we need diplomacy. We need diplomacy to end the war in Ukraine. We need diplomacy to end a potential conflict over Taiwan. And we need diplomacy to create a state of Palestine alongside a state of Israel and to end Israel's wars of regime change, because these are the conflicts that could destroy the world, not in one step, but in one step with escalation, with retaliation, with the pressing one side to use a nuclear weapon, leading to a nuclear exchange, leading to a rapid escalation that ends the world.
Yeah, I have to agree. That's the best case scenario, is that we actually lead with negotiations and diplomacy rather than leading with regime change, shoot first, ask questions later, regime change on behalf of the Israelis and neocons at every opportunity. That is my hope. That's my aspiration. I'm in the same place that Sachs is, and he cares much more about, international opinions and sensibilities and global consensus and globalism in general. But I get there a different way. I get there from the way of sovereignty and America first. This doesn't benefit Americans in any way. Quite to the contrary. We get debt, curtailments of our civil liberties, violations thereof, shredding the Fourth Amendment in the name of a surveillance state that exists, by the way, because of the war on terror. We're only spying on the terrorists. Don't you know that? Well, I'm sorry, but Snowden blew the lid off that one too. So that's where we're at. I'm with Sachs on that.
And there is a book that I may have mentioned in our past discussions, but I recommend it to anybody that wants a chilling and accurate account of how the world could come to an end in 2 hours and 10 minutes. It's called Nuclear War, a Scenario, by the investigative journalist Annie Jacobson. It's a superb, accurate, technical, chilling account of what I'm describing, which could happen in any of these war zones, which is why we need diplomacy, not games, not regime change operations, not Lindsey Graham, our most dangerous and reckless senator, who posts game on as Israel strikes and the United States strikes Iran. Game on. This is not a game.
That's right. This isn't a game. And Lindsey Graham is a blood-soaked neocon, has been throughout most of my life. Never seen a war he didn't support, just like the McCains and Cheneys and Wolfowitzes and Shapiro's and Levin's and all these villainous characters that are really caricatures of the American system and just duplicitous monsters when it comes to foreign policy. Sachs is right. I totally also recommend Annie Jacobson's book on nuclear war. She interviewed some of the top officials in many different countries and kind of analyzed different scenarios of what could happen in a nuclear war and what a nuclear winter really would be like. If you want to be horrified about the prospect of nuclear war and learn more about it that's valuable, I really recommend that book. Annie Jacobson, she also was on the Lex Friedman podcast too, and her appearance was great. Really, really interesting topic that not enough people know about, because it's not exactly in the interests of regimes that, rattle sabers with nuclear power to talk about the worst ramifications of what might happen because they're rattling sabers with nuclear power. So I'm with Sachs here. Mossad and the CIA are villainous, and just getting involved in the Middle East is villainous. The U.S. shouldn't do that. The U.S. had essentially a century of relative peace outside of a few conflicts, the Spanish-American War and the Mexican-American War, over the time in which the Monroe Doctrine was in place, essentially, from the 1820s all the way to World War I. And America's entry into World War I and Wilsonian democracy, exporting that throughout the world, is a total nightmare. And that's where we saw the slide down into empire building. And we still remain there today. It can be corrected, but it doesn't seem like it'll be corrected without a mass awakening of Americans and, a diminishment of the power of the Israel lobby and the military-industrial complex. But I'll be there along the way trying to expose the madness of going the opposite route, the route that we've seen most of my lifetime. But I do want to hear from what you guys say. Let me know in the comments below. Is Sachs correct about this? What's the dark history of the CIA and Mossad that a lot of people don't know about? And is there any real benefit to aligning with Israel in terms of providing it aid and military support? Let me know in the comments below. Like this video, subscribe to the channel. Please do subscribe to Andrew Napolitano. His podcast is awesome. And please consider becoming either a Patreon patron or YouTube member. If you do the latter and become a YouTube member, you're supporting the channel and you get access to early viewing of all my videos before they come out on YouTube. It's a pretty cool benefit and you're helping me out. I'd appreciate it if you do that. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.